I think about games or franchises that are really good at defining the PS Vita, I am a bit at a loss because some games are iconic for the PS Vita, but they're from franchises that started on other systems. Uncharted Golden Abyss and Killzone Mercenary are really good PS Vita games, but the franchises started on the PS2 and PS3. In thinking, I came to the conclusion that one of the most iconic franchises that really defines the Vita that you won't find anywhere else is none other than the visual novel series Danganronpa. Aside from the first two games, we are about to get a new chapter of the Danganronpa series in the West in the coming weeks. Without further delay, here is my official review of Danganronpa Another Episode, Ultra Despair Girls. Before I go any further, I'm going to only say this once. If you have not played and completed the first and second game, do not even start to consider getting another episode. Despite the fact that it takes place between the first and second games, it has endgame spoilers for both games. So if you're thinking about jumping into this first, or jumping into this before you play number 2, don't. The story of Ultra Despair Girls revolves around Komaru Naegi, the little sister of Makoto Naegi, who was the main protagonist of the first Danganronpa game. Upon escaping from an apartment where she was imprisoned for over a year, she is captured by a group of young children who call themselves the Warriors of Hope, and is thrust into Toa City, where her apartment was, that is now a war zone, where these Warriors of Hope children are sending Monokumas out to murder all of the adults in the city to create a children's paradise. Once Komaru sets down in the city, she has to take a hacking gun that she receives that she can use to fight back against the Monokumas and try to find a way out of the city before she is found and murdered. The plot of Another Episode is hard to explain because there are so many spoilers in here, and I want this review to be as spoiler-free as possible. I can't even tell you the identity of the secondary playable character because that's a huge spoiler for the first game. But what I can tell you is that the plot of Another Episode is just as twisted and crazy as the other two games, and it answers a lot of much-needed questions that arose during the first two games. Specifically, it shows you the state of the world outside of the venues the first two games took place in, and it goes into the origins of the series villain as well as the origins of Monokuma himself. Unlike the previous games in the series, which were visual novels with adventure and puzzle elements thrown into the mix, Another Episode is a third-person shooter with puzzle and action elements, and there are a few light RPG elements thrown into the mix as well. When you go through the game, you will be going through various episodes just like you did in the previous games, and in each episode you will have objectives that you need to reach through 3D areas. You might need to go to a secret underground base to meet a certain NPC, or you might need to go to a radio tower to try to contact the outside world. In moving towards these objectives, you will be fighting through waves of enemies in these 3D arenas, as well as solving puzzles in various rooms, from looking for passwords by finding clues by investigating, much like you investigated in the previous games, or by going through a certain area and using specific bullet types to be able to destroy all of the Monokumas in the room at the same time. Now when you go into combat, there are two different segments you can go through, shooting and slashing. To get this out of the way, your companion, whose identity will remain a secret due to spoilers, can be switched to for a limited time, and they have a very hack and slash feel to them, despite the fact that this is a third-person shooter when you're using Komaru. When you use the other character, it will feel like an action game instead of a third-person shooter where you can just run up and slash at them, kind of like in a hack and slash RPG. Shooting is done with your hacking gun. As you play through the game, you will have various different types of bullets that you gain that are all used for different things. Some are used for fighting enemies and some are not. For example, the move bullet that you get at the beginning of the game is used for activating machines like item dispensers, arcade machines, or switches to open doors. Then you have break and burn, which are used for attacking enemies, or knockback, which can knock back enemies or knock shields off of enemies. There are a lot of different bullets that you get throughout the game, and all of them will be used in some sort of combat or puzzle solving, or even both. Another addition that I mentioned earlier were the RPG elements. As you fight and defeat enemies, you will gain experience and level up. This will give you skill points. And as you go through the game, there are various collectible books that you can find in each chapter, and these books
perks allow you to have passive skills, such as automatically locking onto the nearest enemy, being able to have less of a recoil when you fire, the list goes on. The more levels you get, the more skill points you have, and the more skills you can equip. Overall, your first trek through the game should take you about 15 to 16 hours, maybe a little bit more if you're not getting used to the system very quickly, or maybe a little less if you try to run and gun through the entire game and don't stop to fight the optional fights. While this isn't nearly as long as the previous games, this game definitely has a lot of content to go through. As far as the presentation is concerned, the visual presentation looks really well done. Spike and NIS did a really good job on this game. All of the character models, the environments, the effects, the enemies, everything looks really good, and the visuals look practically flawless when you're playing. The only time you can find jagged edges is if you really look hard, or if you're displaying the game on the PlayStation TV and walk up inches away from the screen. For all intents and purposes, this could probably pass for a PS3 game easily. Now the performance is another thing that's good. Despite the high presentation and graphics of the game plays really well. None of the load times ever exceed, say, 6 or 7 seconds, and the frame rate stays steady for almost the entire game. The frame rate does dip every once in a while, but it's not very often, and the dip is hardly even noticeable at all. The bad thing about the presentation is the audio. When you're going through dialogue, if you're like me, you might put it into your PlayStation TV, set it to auto, and then just relax and listen as the story goes on. The problem is that the game will frequently cut off previous dialogue segments in a rush to get the next one going. So you'll see various dialogue segments where someone will be talking and the last 2 or 3 words will get cut off and the next person's dialogue will start. This wasn't just a one-time thing. I did it throughout the entire game, and it happened all the time. Danganronpa Another Episode is another great game from the developers of the previous games. On the downside, there is a little glitch in the audio when you set the dialogue to auto progression. Outside of this is a pretty casual shooting game that will give series fans some much needed answers about the world of Danganronpa and the history behind Monokuma. PlayStation Vita reviews rates Danganronpa Another Episode Ultra Despair Girls a 9 out of 10. If you would like to comment, feel free to below or head to my site at vitareviews.net. And if you're interested in PlayStation TV compatibility or donating to my cause, feel free to hit the links below or head to my site at vitareviews.net or forum.vitareviews.net to be able to look into that information or donate to my cause.